It's a story about relativity. No one enjoys their wedding day, and I had no illusions that mine would be pleasant. Still, I anticipated that I would complete the mission: marriage, commitment, and the more pressing rite of passage, settling down. Marriage seemed a lot like flying. You just had to get on the plane. Once you were aboard, you were committed, statistically safe, despite the nagging feeling that you're about to be stuck for a very, very long time. Although, to be fair, flying is more dependable. If 50% of flights were going to crash and burn like marriages, I think we would all explore different travel options. I made decisions quickly to avoid getting ensnared in the details. I chose the dress because it actually fit, the DJ because, unlike his competitors, he didn't look like an over-enthusiastic pedophile from the 90s. I went with the florist because, in between showing me arrangements, she let me cry in the refrigerator next to the tiger lilies. I started to visit her weekly because I could not afford a therapist. Regrettably, swift, mindless action through the process didn't help. As I drove around running errands, signing contracts, and shelling out deposits, there were moments that felt as though my GPS was talking to me, directly to me. The lilting voice, "You are now off track. You are now off track," started to have an existential ring. 3 months before the wedding, my domestic fantasies included a gas stove in case I decided to pull a Sylvia Plath, or a river that cut through the yard where our children would play, so that I could fill my pockets with rocks and wander peacefully into oblivion like Virginia Woolf. Meanwhile, I was biting my lip, circling pictures and catalogs for the gift registry, hating every dish set, wine glass, set of Tupperware, towel, and kitchen appliance. "Someday you'll really want a mixmaster," I was told, more than once. I desperately wanted to, but I didn't believe them. I circled it anyway. Then one day, the only reservations I thought about were my own. I realized that the only fair thing to do was to call off the wedding. I told my father, who bluntly said, "Well, I'm not surprised. You are always zigging and zagging." He was describing my resolute impetuousness and demonstrated lack of commitment. My father has a way with words. This is why I let him tell my mother. I told my fiancé, and I was calm. There was not going to be a wedding. This is why you don't cram things in your purse. It only took a couple hours to notify everyone. The caterer, the venue operator, the shrink florist, the guests, the relatively uncreepy DJ, the grandmas and the grandpas. I convinced myself this wasn't exactly a runaway bride situation. I had given everyone at least 3 weeks notice after all. I was finally able to breathe again, and I wondered why I hadn't called the wedding off sooner. But my relief was short-lived. The wedding date was still approaching, and I did not get off so easy. Even though I was able to escape the wedding itself, the worst was not over. My parents, feeling guilty about the guests who had made reservations to travel across the country, decided to host a party in lieu of the wedding, even using the same catering company and event space. I think they thought that hosting an event they renamed a family and friend reunion was a kind of apology for the inconvenience. It was also a gesture to minimize the awkwardness. It didn't. Not surprisingly, I was the centerpiece of the event, greeting and hosting, dodging personal and somewhat silly questions. Curious minds wanted to know, "Are you okay? What happened? What are you going to do with your dress?" To be fair, it was juicy, and everyone wanted the details. After slamming a few cocktails in the hallway, I attempted a humorous toast, purposely vague and punctuated by an obligatory thank you and apology. My stomach a clenched fist, knowing that this room full of purportedly happy married Midwesterners would never quite understand what I decided to do. To them, I was rash, impulsive, unchained, and at the very least, a woman who could not make a decision. It felt like a living funeral, one of those new agey events hosted for someone who's about to die. Only instead of mourning my demise, My family and friends were mourning my life without a husband. Everyone gave me a look of pity and offered condolences and condescending words of encouragement. Despondently, older women touched my hands and said, "You're so brave." My great aunt pulled me aside and looked at me gravely. "You know you're turning 30 this year?" she asked, as though it wasn't rhetorical, as though I needed reminding. "Yes," I said, shaking the ice cubes in my glass. "You know that the older you get, the harder it will be to find a good man," she explained, again using the Socratic method. I nodded my head, my eyes glazed over. I didn't remind her that she married a lazy, unemployed alcoholic, a man I never would have married, even if I knew he could impregnate me with the future president. The year before, the same woman had said to me, "How could you let this happen?" We were at my sister's wedding, and she was referring to the fact that my younger sister was getting married before me. I looked across the room now at my sister, who was holding her first son. This woman and her bouffant were decidedly untrustworthy, but still, she made a good point. Maybe I should be terrified of spending my life alone. For all the guests, my choice became a talking point. Married couples ensured me that I would find someone else when the time was right. The religiously inclined offered hope and comfort that surely God had other plans. Divorced women approached me and said they wished they had done the same thing. One woman said, "You're lucky. Mine turned out to be a real son of a bitch." When I told my fiancé that I wanted to call off the wedding, there was the initial shock, tears, and realization that things were probably ending. We were still living together, and a few days after we called off the wedding, he looked at me and said thank you, admitting that he did not have the proverbial balls to do it himself. Despite the pain of what would essentially be a breakup, we were relieved that we were no longer responsible for event coordinating or thwarting our family dramas. We embraced our decision and our ability to finally disregard all etiquette and decorum. I looked around the room at the people who were supposed to be guests at my wedding and felt estranged. While it appeared that my family and friends rallied to support me, I think that the question of my decision was too personal to be understood or communicated at large. It was never going to make sense. My life decision was not post-material. Now, feeling very alone, I wandered away from what I had affectionately titled my big fat fake wedding and called the one person who I knew would understand. My now ex-fiancé was dealing with his own version of the events. His entire family had also decided to fly in and were staying at the same hotels as my guests. I imagined them passing each other unknowingly in the halls and lobbies like political rivals on the streets of D.C. He already knew why I was calling. "Is it as bad for you as it is for me?" he asked. "God, I'm not sure what's worse, this or the wedding," I answered. We both laughed. "Hey, at least you don't have to do that first dance," he said cheerfully. We had struggled over what song to choose, and we were both convinced this was yet another act that would be difficult to perform with sincerity. "It would have been terrible," I added. "And the toast would have been a disaster," he said. "And now I don't have to worry about spilling wine down the front of a white wedding dress." "You already spilled on yourself, didn't you?" he joked. "Yep." After a slight pause, "Hey, do you want to get out of there?" he offered, almost instinctually, out of habit, as if he knew I needed to be saved. I said my goodbyes quickly and didn't provide an explanation for my early exit, taking a cab across town to a dive bar where I met the man who I now call my ex-fiancé. In the dim lighting, he sat on a stool, stirring a whiskey on the rocks. I pulled up the stool next to him and ordered a Maker's Mark, also on the rocks. He had already put quarters in the jukebox and was playing some of our favorite 60s pop songs. We listened to simple songs with simple lyrics and titles like "Then He Kissed Me," "Be My Baby," "One Fine Day." These were songs of another era when things seemed easier, less complex. They embodied a simplicity that we longed to understand. It was a time when love alone seemed like enough. We sat next to each other and smiled, relieved to be out of the spotlight, comforted that for now, there were no more questions to be answered. On the major points, we were in agreement. We were glad there was no wedding. We had probably rushed the engagement, and we both agreed that our families were equally insane. We called our secret rendezvous our honeymoon, trading stories and laughing at the ridiculousness of it all. Raising our glasses, we toasted to what mysteries lied ahead, relieved that our day was over. As the sun set, I forgot about the noise and the chaos. Things were almost peaceful, and for a moment in our escape, I came to understand the meaning of, for better or for worse,